Poor little girl washes windows for milk. Her answer to Billionaire's question makes him break down. Marcus Thorne, founder and CEO of Meridian Motors, stared impassively at the Q3 profit projections displayed on the holographic screen dominating his starkly minimalist Detroit office. Numbers. Clean, precise, logical. Unlike people, numbers never disappointed, never betrayed, never reminded him of compromises made on the climb to the top. At 60, Marcus had forged an automotive empire through relentless drive, shrewd decisions, and what some whispered was a necessary ruthlessness. His face, etched with the lines of command rather than laughter, rarely betrayed emotion. His life was a monument to controlled success. A sprawling Grosse Pointe mansion overlooking Lake St. Clair, staffed but empty of warmth. A collection of vintage cars gathering dust in a climate-controlled garage. A string of polite but distant acquaintances, none close enough to breach the fortress he'd built around himself after a brief, failed marriage decades ago. Children? He'd never made time for them. Meridian Motors was his child, his legacy, his demanding mistress. This morning, however, required a deviation from his meticulously scheduled routine. A potential land acquisition deal necessitated a visit to a largely forgotten industrial zone on the city's struggling east side, the site of his very first factory. Acquired and later shuttered 20 years ago in a strategic restructuring that had cemented his reputation for decisive, if brutal, efficiency. He remembered the protests, the anger, the pleading faces of laid-off workers as he drove away, telling himself it was just business, the necessary collateral damage of progress. He hadn't thought about that place or those people in years. A thick, unseasonable fog blanketed Detroit, muffling the usual city sounds and reducing visibility. His driver, Thomas, navigated the Bentley Continental cautiously through streets that grew increasingly unfamiliar, the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown receding in the rearview mirror, replaced by boarded-up buildings and neglected infrastructure. "Almost there, Mr. Thorne," Thomas announced, his voice neutral. "The old Apex Polymers site is just ahead." Apex Polymers was the original company Marcus had bought out and renamed. Marcus merely grunted, staring out at the gray landscape. He disliked being reminded of the past, of the Messier realities obscured by stock prices and market share reports. This trip felt like stepping back into a chapter he'd deliberately closed. The fog seemed to press in, heavy with unspoken histories and the ghosts of decisions made long ago. He felt a flicker of unease, an unfamiliar sensation he quickly suppressed. It was just a land deal, another step toward securing Meridian Motors' future dominance. Nothing more. 9-year-old Mia shivered, pulling her thin, oversized sweatshirt tighter around her small frame. The damp fog seeped into her bones, colder than yesterday's sunshine. She stood perched precariously on an old, overturned plastic milk crate at the intersection, her small hands raw and red from the chill and the rough, dirty rag she held. Her stomach rumbled, a familiar ache she tried to ignore. "Wash your windows." "Only $1," she called out, her voice thin but hopeful, trying to catch the eye of drivers pausing at the stop sign. Most ignored her, staring straight ahead or deliberately looking away. A few shook their heads curtly. Rejection was common, but Mia persisted. She had a mission. Tucked inside her sweatshirt, nestled against her chest for warmth, was Ash. A tiny scrap of a kitten, mostly gray fur and big green eyes. Ash was the only living creature Mia had left to care for. Her mother, Sarah, had found him shivering behind a dumpster a few months before she got too sick to work. Sarah, who had always had a soft spot for strays, human or animal, had brought him home, cleaned him up, and declared him part of their tiny family. Sarah had worked tirelessly at a local garment factory, long hours for low pay, always exhausted but always managing a smile for Mia, always reinforcing the importance of kindness. Even when we have little, Mia bug, she'd say, brushing Mia's hair, we share what we can. We look out for the ones who have even less, the ones who can't speak for themselves. Then the coughing started. It got worse, turning into pneumonia that settled deep in her lungs. Without health insurance or savings, Sarah had relied on underfunded clinics and home remedies until it was too late. She passed away nearly 6 months ago, leaving Mia utterly alone in their small, drafty shack tucked away in an alley behind a derelict warehouse. The landlord hadn't officially discovered Mia was alone yet. She'd managed to stay hidden, terrified of being sent away, clinging to the only home she'd ever known and the little kitten who was her last link to her mother. Survival became a series of desperate calculations. Finding discarded food, collecting bottles and cans, and, most recently, washing windows at this intersection. Every dollar was precious. Today's goal, milk. Not for her, but for Ash. The kitten had been listless lately, meowing weakly, and Mia remembered her mother saying kittens needed milk to grow strong. Mia hadn't had milk herself in weeks, subsisting on found scraps, but Ash needed it more. Her mother's words echoed in her head. Take care of those who are weaker than me. A sleek, dark car, impossibly large and silent, glided to a stop at the intersection, emerging from the fog like a phantom. It looked expensive, important. Mia took a deep breath, held up her rag, and projected her voice as best she could. Clean your windows, mister. Just $1. Marcus Thorne frowned as the small figure darted towards his Bentley. A child working the street corner. It was a sight both pitiful and irritating, a symptom of the urban decay he preferred to ignore. Thomas tensed beside him, ready to wave the girl away. No, wait, Marcus said curtly, surprising himself as much as his driver. He lowered the tinted window a few inches. Cold, damp air, carrying the scent of exhaust fumes and poverty, seeped into the car's climate-controlled luxury. He saw a young girl, 9 or 10 perhaps, small for her age. Her clothes were worn, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes, large and startlingly blue in the gray light, held a determined spark. She clutched a filthy rag in one hand, the other gesturing towards his windshield. Wash your windows, mister. Only $1, she repeated, her teeth chattering slightly. Marcus studied her for a moment. Just a kid trying to hustle a buck. He usually ignored such encounters. But something about her persistence, the way she stood shivering on that crate, yet met his gaze directly, held his attention. He reached into his wallet, pulling out not a single dollar, but a crisp $10 bill. All right, he said, his voice gruff. Clean them. He passed the bill through the gap in the window. Mia's eyes widened at the sight of the $10 more than she usually made in a whole morning. A bright, gap-toothed smile transformed her smudged face. Wow, thank you, mister. Right away. She attacked the windshield with surprising efficiency, scrubbing away the grime with focused energy despite her inadequate rag. She even tried to reach the side windows, stretching on tiptoe. After a minute, she stepped back, proudly surveying her work. The windows weren't perfect, but they were cleaner. Marcus simply nodded, dismissing her, ready to roll up the window and drive away. But Mia didn't pocket the money and run. Instead, she clutched the bill tightly and darted across the street towards a small, run-down corner grocery store, disappearing inside. Curiosity, an emotion Marcus rarely indulged, pricked at him. Was a child that desperate for money going to buy? Candy? Soda? He found himself opening the car door, before Thomas could react. "Wait here, Thomas," he commanded, stepping out into the fog. He walked towards the grocery store, keeping a discreet distance, feeling absurdly out of place in his bespoke suit and handmade Italian shoes on the cracked, litter-strewn sidewalk. He watched through the grimy store window as Mia approached the counter, exchanged the $10 bill for a small carton of milk and a handful of coins, then hurried back out. She didn't open the milk. Instead, she walked quickly towards a nearby alley, disappearing between two dilapidated buildings. Marcus hesitated for only a second before following, driven by an inexplicable need to understand. He turned into the alley. The air was damp and close, smelling of wet refuse. And there, huddled against the cold brick wall, near an overflowing dumpster, was Mia. She wasn't drinking the milk. She had found a broken piece of ceramic plate and was carefully pouring the white liquid into it. A tiny, skinny gray kitten emerged from beneath an old tarp, meowing weakly, and began to lap eagerly at the milk. Mia watched the kitten, a look of gentle satisfaction on her face. Marcus approached quietly, stopping a few feet away. The scene was strangely poignant: the destitute child, the starving kitten, the shared offering of milk in the bleak alleyway. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, his voice softer than he intended. Mia looked up, startled, her big blue eyes widening. She instinctively moved closer to the kitten, as if to protect it. "You bought milk," Marcus stated, kneeling awkwardly on the damp pavement, ignoring the potential damage to his expensive trousers. "But you're not drinking it. Why didn't you buy something for yourself? Some food?" Mia looked from Marcus to the kitten, then back again. She seemed to weigh her answer, her expression earnest and open. "Ash was hungrier," she said simply, gesturing with her chin towards the kitten. "He needed it more than me. Ash, my kitten, he's all I have left." She paused, then added softly, matter-of-factly, "My mom taught me. She said, always take care of those who are weaker than you, even if you don't have much yourself. She said kindness is free, but it's worth everything." Marcus felt a strange tightness in his chest. Such simple words, yet they carried unexpected weight. "Your mother. Where is she now?" he asked gently. Mia's gaze dropped to the pavement. She traced a pattern on the damp concrete with the toe of her worn sneaker. "She's gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the kitten's lapping. "Got sick last year. She worked at the factory, the one down the street that closed, so she could buy milk for me." She looked up again, her eyes shining with unshed tears, yet clear with an innocent conviction that struck Marcus to the core. "Now, I gotta take care of myself. And Ash, he was her last friend she gave me. The factory down the street that closed. Worked there, so she could buy milk for me. Take care of those who are weaker than you." The words seemed to echo in the damp alley, mingling with the image of Mia's earnest face and the memory of her mother's simple wisdom. Suddenly, the fog outside seemed insignificant compared to the one clearing in Marcus Thorne's mind, revealing a landscape of regret he hadn't allowed himself to visit in 2 decades. The factory, Apex Polymers, his first major acquisition and, subsequently, his first major closure. 20 years ago, he'd been younger then, hungrier, eager to prove himself, to shed the skin of his middle-class upbringing and build an empire. The factory was old, inefficient, bleeding money. Closing it was the logical business decision, the swift, surgical cut needed to streamline operations and maximize profit for the nascent Meridian Motors. He remembered the day he announced it, standing on a makeshift platform in the noisy factory yard, facing hundreds of anxious workers. He delivered the news coolly, professionally, speaking of market realities and strategic necessities, deflecting the waves of anger, fear, and desperation that rolled towards him. He'd seen their faces, grim-faced men who'd worked there for decades, younger workers with families, worried women. A woman. The memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening with sudden, sickening clarity. A thin woman, maybe in her late 20s then, with tired eyes but a determined set to her jaw. She had pushed through the crowd, her voice trembling but clear, pleading with him not just for her job, but for everyone's. "Mr. Thorne, please," she had said, her voice cutting through the noise. "This factory, it's all some of us have. I have a child, a baby girl. I need this job to feed her, to buy her milk. Please reconsider. We'll work harder, take pay cuts. Just don't do this." He had barely registered her face at the time, just another obstacle, another emotional plea standing in the way of progress. He'd given a curt, dismissive answer about severance packages and retraining programs, empty platitudes. He hadn't really believed in himself, and then he had turned away, instructing his security to clear the area. He hadn't looked back. Now, looking at Mia, at her startlingly blue eyes so full of resilience and sorrow, at her small frame huddled protectively over a stray kitten, feeding it milk she needed herself, the connection wasn't a certainty, but a horrifying possibility struck him with the force of a physical blow. Could Mia's mother, Sarah, have been that woman? The woman whose desperate plea he had ignored 20 years ago? The woman who had worked herself to death trying to provide for the child he saw now, abandoned and washing windows for milk money? The carefully constructed walls around Marcus's heart didn't just crack, they crumbled. The weight of 20 years of willful ignorance, of prioritizing profit over people, crashed down on him. Mia's simple act of kindness towards a helpless animal stood in unbearable contrast to his own past actions. Her mother's words, "Take care of those weaker," felt like a direct indictment, a judgment delivered by the innocent child of someone his ambition might have crushed. He sank back on his heels, the cold dampness of the alley pavement seeping through his expensive suit, unnoticed. A choked sound escaped his throat. Tears, unfamiliar and unwelcome, pricked at his eyes and then spilled over, tracing hot paths down his cheeks. He, Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, was weeping in a filthy alleyway, brought low by the quiet dignity of a 9-year-old orphan and the ghost of a decision made a lifetime ago. He reached out a trembling hand, not quite touching Mia, but wanting to bridge the chasm between his world and hers. "Mia," he choked out, his voice thick and unrecognizable. Your mother. She taught you well." He struggled for breath, the guilt a physical weight on his chest. I think I forgot something important. Something your mother understood." He looked at the small girl, seeing not just a street urchin, but the embodiment of the human cost he had so callously disregarded. "I owe her," he whispered, more to himself than to Mia. "And I owe you." Mia watched the rich man cry, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion, and then to a cautious sympathy. She didn't understand why he was so upset, but she recognized pain when she saw it. She hesitantly reached out and patted his arm, her small, grimy hand surprisingly gentle on his expensive suit sleeve. "It's okay, mister," she said softly. "Don't be sad." Her simple gesture of comfort only deepened Marcus's shame. He pulled himself together, wiping his eyes brusquely. He couldn't leave her here. He couldn't undo the past, couldn't know for sure if Sarah was the woman from the factory, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he couldn't walk away from this child. "Mia," he said, his voice still rough but steadier now. "Where do you live? You can't stay out here." Mia's eyes clouded with suspicion. "I have a home," she insisted, gesturing vaguely down the alley. "Me and Ash are okay." She instinctively didn't trust adults asking too many questions. Her mother had warned her about strangers, about people who might take her away. Marcus understood her fear. He needed to handle this carefully, correctly. He couldn't just sweep her off into his Bentley. Life wasn't a fairy tale, and child protective laws were rightly stringent. He took out his phone again, this time calling not his office, but his personal lawyer, a man known for his discretion and ability to navigate complex situations. "David," Marcus said, keeping his voice low, "I have a situation, an urgent one involving a minor, potentially endangered. I need you to contact the appropriate channel's Child Protective Services, I assume discreetly, but immediately. I'm on the east side, near the old Apex site." He explained the basics, omitting his personal emotional turmoil, but emphasizing the child's apparent abandonment and precarious living conditions. "I want to ensure her safety, provide whatever resources are necessary, explore options for foster care, possibly guardianship. My resources are fully available. Handle it." While David set the wheels of bureaucracy in motion, Marcus focused on Mia. He knew terrifying her would solve nothing. "Mia," he said gently, "I want to help you. And Ash." He nodded towards the kitten, who was now washing his face meticulously after finishing the milk. "It's getting cold, and this alley isn't safe. There are people whose job it is to help kids whose moms aren't around anymore. They can make sure you have a warm place to stay, food to eat." Mia looked scared, clutching Ash closer. "They'll take Ash away," she whispered, tears welling in her own eyes now. "They won't let me keep him." "No," Marcus said firmly, meeting her gaze. "I won't let that happen. Wherever you go, Ash goes with you. I promise." It was a promise he intended to keep, mobilizing whatever legal or financial leverage was necessary. The arrival of a police officer and, shortly after, a social worker from CPS was inevitably stressful for Mia. Despite Marcus's reassurances and the social worker's kind demeanor, Mia was terrified, clinging to Ash, refusing to speak to them directly. Marcus stayed by her side, explaining the situation calmly, vouching for Mia's character, and making his intentions clear. He wished to be directly involved in ensuring her welfare, including applying for emergency foster placement himself. He led them to Mia's home, a dilapidated wooden shack leaning precariously against the back wall of an abandoned warehouse. It was barely more than a single room, drafty, with a leaky roof, a thin mattress on the floor, and little else besides a few cherished mementos of her mother, a chipped mug, a worn Bible, a framed school photo of Mia. Seeing the reality of her solitary existence hardened Marcus's resolve. The process was complex and fraught with potential pitfalls. Marcus's wealth and influence helped expedite background checks and home assessments, but the system couldn't be entirely bypassed. Mia and Ash were temporarily placed in an emergency shelter while Marcus underwent interviews and his mansion was assessed for suitability, a surreal experience for both him and his staff. He visited Mia daily at the shelter, bringing books, warm clothes, and special food for Ash, slowly earning her fragile trust. He learned more about her mother through Mia's innocent recollections, Sarah's love for gardening, her quiet faith, her constant worry about providing for Mia. The picture solidified. A good woman dealt a harsh hand, possibly made harsher by decisions Marcus himself had made. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of paperwork and interviews, Marcus was approved as Mia's emergency foster parent. The day he brought Mia and Ash from the shelter to his Grosse Pointe mansion was overwhelming for everyone. Mia wandered silently through the enormous, echoing rooms, clutching Ash tightly, dwarfed by the scale and opulence. Marcus, accustomed to solitude, found himself navigating the unfamiliar territory of bedtime stories, school enrollment forms, and kitten-proofing priceless antiques. It was awkward, challenging, and utterly transformative. Life in the Thorne mansion was a world away from the alley behind the warehouse. Mia slowly adjusted, aided by Marcus's quiet patience and the surprising affection Ash developed for the mansion's plush carpets and sunny window ledges. Marcus hired tutors to help Mia catch up on the schooling she'd missed and discovered she was bright and eager to learn, soaking up knowledge like dry ground soaking up rain. He kept his promise about bedtime stories. Initially awkward, reading children's books felt foreign, but seeing Mia's rapt attention, her small face relaxed in sleep afterwards, became the unexpected highlight of his day. He told her stories about cars, about stars, about faraway places, and sometimes, haltingly, about his own childhood, sharing pieces of himself he hadn't shared with anyone in decades. Mia, in turn, shared more memories of her mother, painting a picture of love and resilience that continued to chip away at Marcus's hardened exterior. The legal process for formal adoption was lengthy, but Marcus pursued it relentlessly. He wanted Mia to have permanency, security, a true family. He started spending less time at the Meridian Motors headquarters, delegating more, finding himself uninterested in the cutthroat maneuvers that had once defined his existence. His priorities were shifting. One evening, Mia asked him about his work. He tried to explain Meridian Motors, the cars, the factories. He found himself talking about the workers, the importance of treating people fairly, words that would have sounded hollow coming from him just months earlier, but now felt true. Inspired by Mia's innate compassion and haunted by the memory of the past, he conceived of a new initiative. He established the Sarah and Mia Community Trust, funded substantially through his personal fortune and seeded with Meridian Motors stock. Its mission was multifaceted, providing nutritional support, including fresh milk programs, for children in underserved Detroit neighborhoods, funding educational scholarships, supporting job training programs, and offering grants to community health clinics in low-income areas. It was his attempt at atonement, a way to honor Mia's mother, whether she was the specific woman from the factory or simply represented all those he had overlooked, and to invest in the kind of community support that might have saved her, that might prevent other children like Mia from falling through the cracks. He involved Mia in the trust development in age-appropriate ways. She helped choose colors for the logo, offered opinions on programs for kids, and her simple, direct questions often cut through the corporate jargon, reminding Marcus and his team of the real human purpose behind the spreadsheets and proposals. Her presence softened Marcus, made him more approachable, and his transformation did not go unnoticed by his employees or the wider Detroit community. The day the first community center funded by the trust opened its doors, Mia stood beside Marcus. She wore a simple new dress, her hair neatly brushed, Ash cradled securely in her arms. He'd become an unofficial mascot. Looking at the children lining up for milk and snacks, the parents signing up for job workshops, Mia beamed. "Mommy would like this," she whispered, burying her face briefly in Ash's soft fur. She always wanted to help people. Marcus knelt beside her, placing an arm around her small shoulders. He looked out at the crowd, then back at Mia's hopeful face. The emptiness that had defined his life for so long was filled with something new, something warm and genuine. He hadn't just rescued Mia. She, in her quiet, profound way, had rescued him. Yes, she would, sweetheart, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. She'd be incredibly proud of you. And you know what? So am I. He hugged her close, the small girl and her kitten anchoring him to a present filled with purpose and a future bright with the promise of redemption. The architect of ambition had finally learned to build something far more valuable than an empire, A home founded on compassion, built with kindness, and filled with love.